Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram Live broadcast. I am Jason Haas, as always. I'm back in our normal location on our tasting patio. And also, I'm back to our normal format. We have a guest I am super excited about for today. It's Samantha Cole-Johnson, who is the senior U.S. editor for JancisRobinson.com. And I think is one of the most exciting new voices in the world of wine writing in the English language right now. So I can't wait to talk to Sam. But as I usually do, while we're waiting for people to join, I'm going to share a few pictures with what we have going on here at the winery. So the big news for us is that we are just about done with harvest. This is our harvest chalkboard. Each of the lines on here is a separate pick, and you can see we are down to the very last little bits. We've done all of the reds. Those are all in. Did our last cleanup pick of all of those yesterday. In terms of whites, we have some Roussanne left out, and that's about it. So give you a few pictures of what's going on. First in the cellar. We've been doing a lot of pressing off of things. So this is the Sanso, our Sanso lot that we pressed off. Those are the skins that are left over. We've been seeing unusually dark colors and really beautiful flavors. It's really it seems like a great vintage. We're also doing lots of barreling down, so we're steam cleaning barrels because we got to have someplace to put all of this wine that we're now pressing off. In the vineyard, as I mentioned, we're kind of, there's lots of empty blocks. So this is a block that had grapes on it until earlier this week. This is a Mourvedre block down at the bottom of the vineyard. We're starting to see some fall colors coming through. This is looking over some Syrah and a little bit of our nursery block of Grenache. We are really just waiting on Roussanne. We've picked a little bit. It doesn't have the sugars concentration that we were hoping for, and we know that we are getting to the very end. So we picked it. We actually laid it down on straw in our greenhouses, the way we might for a Vin de Paille. I think I have a different view of that you could see a little more. But we're not going to get it to dessert wine sweetness. We're just trying to get it concentrated up to maybe 22 brix to balance some of the lower sugar stuff that we've got. And then we have a little bit still on the vines. A couple pretty pictures of Roussanne clusters still waiting out there. Those are going to get picked on Monday. Then we'll be done. And then finally, one last piece, just as an illustration of what makes Roussanne such a challenge. So here are two Roussanne clusters. The one on the right is just as it was growing. The one on the left is a Roussanne cluster that I've turned around. So the other side of this, what was outside, is that kind of golden russet color. The inside of the cluster is bright green. So this is the magic and challenge of Roussanne, is that there's a ton of variety within blocks, within clusters, even within vines. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And now I'm going to invite Sam to join. Last week, I think. It all went very smoothly. Hopefully it will go just as smoothly this time around. Hey, Sam, how are you?
Good. Good. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. Feeling relieved at this point that it looks like harvest is all in or almost in the barn, and it seems like it's high quality and quantity is a little above average, and it's a relief.
That layout of the Roussanne on the straw, do you do that frequently?
We do it. No, frequently is way too much. We don't do it frequently. We do it when we're trying to make a Vin de Paille style dessert wine, which we haven't done since 2018. So it's not like we do it every year. We do it kind of every 3 or 4 years, but the grapes have to be in really good condition in order for this to work, because if you lay them on there and they're already starting to fall apart, then you end up with rot spreading really fast. So there's a lot of years where you can't do it. And we've realized that the demand for sweet wines is limited enough that it makes a lot more sense to do this like in slightly larger quantities once every 3 or 4 years rather than try to do it every year.
Yeah. I That's a personal pet project. Every time I go to a dinner party, I bring a bottle of sweet wine because I think it's great to share. And if you have lots of people, you can finish a bottle. We don't drink enough of it. So, yeah.
I mean, there's some of the most magical wines in the world, and yet kind of American culture has moved away from drinking a dessert wine typically with dessert. So it's thank you for trying to fight back on that.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a theory on why that is, which is I'll try and share it as quickly as possible. But I think that as families have spread out and we're more, you know, maybe we're two people in a household, maybe we're three or four even, but when the kids get older, they go away, and so people aren't sitting down for family dinner in the sense that they used to, and sitting around and swapping stories and having the time to have an additional wine at dinner. And this was on brilliant display when I visited Portugal last year, because they said, well, we have two tables. We have the one where we have dinner, and then we move from this room into the other room, and this room gets cleared up while we've moved to the port room, and then we drink port and we swap stories. And I was like, oh, nobody does that anymore.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Okay, well, we're sort of jumping in the middle. I like to start by asking wine writers sort of which came first, the interest in wine or the interest in writing?
Oh, absolutely, the interest in wine. I didn't actually think that I never planned on being a writer. I had a strong interest in wine. I thought originally that I would continue because I started in service, and then I jumped into, I thought I was going to do one vintage. I ended up doing 5. At that point, I kind of thought I would be in production. I did a vintage in the vineyard. I thought I was going to go into viticulture, and then I got the offer. And meanwhile, I'm writing on the side. But the reason that I was writing was more for my own, logging my own knowledge and what I learned, and helping other people who were trying to get through WSET 3-year diploma. So my harvest journals were trying to include this nitty-gritty information that you might not get out of a textbook.
Right.
And it was really for that, because I thought I was going to go on, and I do teach WSET 3 and diploma now, but I thought I was going to go on and open my own approved program providership for WSET. So I was writing to help people study. I wasn't writing because I just wanted to write stories. That was never.
So if you knew you were interested in wine for a long time, like, was wine on your family table growing up? Was it something that you got interested in like that early?
No, no. My grandmother is a huge enthusiast now. She comes down to Oregon. She goes down to Northern California, and she drinks all of the Pinot Noir. And that's pretty much it. But no, when I was younger, it was, maybe there was a bottle of Rombauer on the table once in a while. If it was a fancy week, my mom always got a bottle of Dom Perignon under the tree for New Year's. And then occasionally we'd go out to dinner and my dad would order a bottle of Chateauneuf-du-Pape. But that was really it. That was like, there were those 3 occasions. And then now everybody has more of an interest in wine, but not at the time.
So did you have a wine that for you was like, oh, like now I see what this is all about?
Not really. It was much more. I have a wine that was the reason that I wanted to make wine my career, but I don't have a wine that was the entryway. The entryway was really realizing that I love to study. This is my favorite thing. Clearly, going into the MW program, you have to love it. Like, you have to love to study. And doing research to write articles, that's a huge part of it. But I love to study, and I graduated from university, and I had no outlet for that. And I was in finance, and I really hated that. And so I didn't want to study it. And so I started studying wine, and I realized that this was it wasn't that it was a delicious thing that I could have with dinner. It was that was the culmination, but it was the political aspect, the geographical aspect. It was all of these things that you could pull together, and then you could give that in a bottle to someone. And that was intriguing. And then when I got further on in my career, and I was studying wine, but I wasn't quite sure that that was going to be my career. I was working at Red Star Tavern, which was downtown Portland. It closed during COVID, but I was working as a server there, and James Cahill, who worked for Tony Soder at the time, came in and he did a staff lineup for us. So he came in to tell us about Willamette Valley. And he did it with such enthusiasm, and he was asking us questions, and I was the only one on staff who was studying wine at all, and so I was the one answering the questions. And at the end of his presentation, he grabbed me and like pulled me aside, and he gave me a bottle of their Yamhill Carlton vineyard series, their origin series. And he was like, keep studying. We need more people who are studying wine. And that was, I got to take that home and drink it. And I think about that moment a lot, where he made me want to keep studying.
As somebody who has done a lot of those sorts of presentations to restaurant teams, I can tell you what a pleasure it is to have somebody on the other side of that who is like engaged and asking questions and wants to know more than just okay, what does this pair with? What do we sell it for? Like, give me 2 sentences to say about this wine. Like it really is something that like those of us on the other side of that table get super turned on by.
I can also say, as the person who was in the restaurant selling the wine, when producers come in and they educate on their wines and you get to know them, and how hopefully they come in and they're in a really good mood and they're passionate, because that's infectious. And then, oh man, did I sell a lot of Soder. The next, well, I think I worked there for another 1.5 years, and I sold a lot of Soder. So it makes a difference.
Awesome. So, okay, can you kind of take us through the timeline from you working as a server in a restaurant to now you are senior U.S. editor for JancisRobinson.com? I mean, I feel like that happened really pretty quick. But like, what was the path? How did that get there? How did you get there?
It happened really quick, and I'm still trying to grow into these shoes. They're really roomy. But I was serving in a restaurant. Red Star Tavern was where I fell after I fell out of finance, or made the decision not to be unhappy. It's really how that happened. But I went from there up the street to a place called Park Avenue Fine Wines, also closed after COVID. But there was a wonderful woman there. Her name is Stacy Gibson, and she runs a company in Portland now that's a catering company with her husband called Parallel Food and Drink. But she's an advanced sommelier, and at the time I thought I was going to go the Court of Masters route, and I did for a little bit. But she was so generous she was so willing to hand off tasks and give me responsibility. And this has been something that's incredibly important in every place I've worked in wine that has made a difference in my career, has been people who are willing to give you responsibility.
Yeah.
And if you hang yourself with that rope, then it's reined back in a little bit, but they're willing to give you the rope. So she let me help with ordering. She'd just be like, you do inventory, you put a wine on the list. If it does well, it does well, and we'll order more of it. If it doesn't, then maybe we're only going to order 3 or 4 bottles to start. So that was really incredibly helpful. And then she was also the person who pushed me. Ken Paolo from Walter Scott came in, and he was carrying his own bag and selling his own wines to the retail shop in the back. And he was talking about winemaking, and he was talking about it in a way where I didn't know half of what he was saying. And so I just had to keep asking questions, and he kept explaining. And at the end of it, I'd known that I wanted to work a harvest, but at the end of it, I could not stop talking about it. And Stacy turned around. She was like, I need you to shut up. We're about to go into service, but also you need to leave here and you need to go work a harvest, and you need to do it this year. So I, with her blessing, I left and I went and worked vintage in 2018 for Lingua Franca. And I thought I was going to go back to service, and I did for a bit after that harvest. Went and worked at Kennard, and that was awesome. But when I left service, I thought I'd go back. And when I went back, it felt wrong. And so within a few months, I was calling Thomas, begging him to have me back for another vintage. And that just kind of, that spiraled into 3 more after that. I took off and went to Australia, and then got shot back to the US in 2020. Meanwhile, I started writing harvest journals. I should throw that in there. My second vintage, I started writing harvest journals because I'd been shortlisted for Jancis Robinson's writing competition for a travel log or a travel guide. And I didn't even wait until results came out. I didn't win. But right after I was shortlisted, I emailed her and I said, hey, you haven't published a harvest journal for 11 years since Richard Hemming published his, and I want to do it. And she said, okay, you can do it. And here are all the things that we needed in by this. We need landscape photos. We need this and that and the other thing. And like, be sure that you're on time. And it went so well that after 2019 vintage, I went over to Australia and I said, I want to do it again. And she said, okay. And then I did one in Napa. And then I bounced to Harlan Estate, Bond and Promontory. And I could not write one while I was there, but I started writing about other things while I was there I wrote a piece on the history of vineyard management companies, which is a little bit dry, but it's really interesting to me. And then I wrote a couple pieces on labor and labor dissatisfaction and labor shortages and in-house farming versus vineyard management, having companies farming. And then I got a call that the publication was being acquired by Recurrent, and would I like to move back to the Pacific Northwest and become the Pacific Northwest specialist? And I said, yes, of course I would love to do that. And then when I got back, we had a bit of a hiccup last year with our parent company. Had acquired quite a few publications and was going, how it was put to me was they were going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. Now we are going 10 in the right direction. They've slowed down. And our US executive editor, Elaine, was so fantastic. But as part of company-wide layoffs, Elaine was let go, and then we needed more US coverage, and it just kind of, we kind of held on for a while, and I published an article or two a month. And then August of this year, I think it was August, I got the call that said, hey, we'd really like you to be full-time. And I said, yes, of course, I would love to be full-time. That's all I've ever wanted. So here I am.
Amazing. And you just were down here in Paso. You did a deep dive into Paso, which is really the first serious deep dive that the site had done in a long time. I think Elaine did a dive in like 2016 maybe, or
it was 2016, and it was a lot about water rights and who had them and who didn't, and who was irrigating and how
right.
water was parsed out. But the AVAs were so new at that point that there weren't all that many people using them, the sub AVA. Right. And so there hadn't been a piece written about how, for our site, I'm thinking about your your blog. I'm like, you've gone into it a lot. But for our, we hadn't broken down how all the differences between the west to the east and irrigation and rainfall and soil types. And so just deep dived into that.
No, it was amazingly like thorough. And I know Neil and I were reading it kind of together and talking about it. We're like, yeah, okay, like these are all kind of the things that we would have said if we had been asked to write about this. So well done. But more interestingly, from my point, like, were there things that really surprised you about Paso that you weren't expecting before you came, or that just played out in a different way than you had thought they would before you visited?
I mean, there's the classic stereotype of 16% alcohol wines that you need a knife and fork to cut, which is not very much not the case from where I was standing. I was like, you have such a diversity of wine, and it really is dependent on what you've planted and where you've planted it. And so I tend to prefer, if I'm drinking with dinner, lighter alcohol wines, and I found them. So I think that people shouldn't be dissuaded from coming to Paso and booking to go taste at places that do make a more restrained style. There's plenty that you guys have down there.
We very much liked the notes that you wrote. I mean, I feel like anybody who spends a fair amount of time here knows that there are wines of all different styles, like big and lush and ripe, like you described, much fresher and brighter styles. I mean, that whole diversity.
I think that maybe the reason it's not as well known, you guys have some volume. You've got good exports. You can show the world, but a lot of smaller producers that are making that style.
Right.
And then about the larger companies that have such volume, and that's most of what people are familiar with. And so when they go down, they're like, well, Austin Hope and Justin and these styles they're well put together wines. They got a lot of heft to them.
And I think you did a good job of explaining that in a way that told people what they would be like, and yet gave some context. Like the notes were fun to read, which I think tasting notes usually aren't. Tasting notes are usually pretty boring. But I didn't think that was the case. That was with what you wrote. You both got a good sense of what things were actually going to be like, but it was also like it read like a story, not just like a collection of adjectives.
Good. Thank you.
So I know that for JancisRobinson.com, you've been making a push, or I guess maybe it's the parent company that's been making a push to have more representation, more presence of the United States in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can talk about it in the sense of what I know, which is that originally it was Elena and I both hired, and then it was me brought on full time. And we are pushing to have more US coverage. I think I'm like, what else can I tell you? I'm traveling once a month right now. So I was in Paso, and then I was in Sonoma. I'll be in Yakima Sunday night this week through the week next week. But it's a lot for one person to cover. So, and it is hard because we do have, our reader base is very heavily UK based. And so if the wines that I'm reviewing aren't in the UK market, right, it's harder for, well, it's impossible for people in the UK to find them if they're not there. But it's also makes my content less interesting to them if I'm recommending wines they can't get. So it's a delicate balance we have to strike here with, we want to deliver content for our current readers, and then we want new readers who are US based, and we certainly want people to know who we are. I was with a distributor the other day, and they said, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh, I work in publication. And they're like, oh, so wine is just for fun. And I was like, oh, no, like it's a wine publication. And they go, oh, which one? And I said, jancisrobinson.com. And they said, what's that? And I, oh, no. We do very much need more presence here. And I think it's just about going out and meeting people and trying the wines and having their consumers know that we're around as well. So.
Yeah, no, I absolutely see that. But I think, I don't know, I think you've already made an impact in getting things forward in that direction.
I hope so. We're also pushing towards, I'm trying to, we'll see how much video content I can put out. You put out a good amount of video content. It's hard. I'm putting together like 5-minute news for the week. It just started last week. And then we'll try and put together some video content for the site as well, more in the learn vein of videos on, this sounds silly, but like how to open a bottle correctly, yeah, and how to order from a menu, and like how to parse the wine list. But we'll start putting together that content as well. And I'm excited about that. I think that gets a lot of traction, and a lot of people start to know that you're around, because people know Jancis. I think a large reason that people know Jancis so well is because of the BBC.
Right.
It's the World, the Oxford Companion are wonderful references, and we certainly use them as an industry. But I think the reason that so many consumers love her is because of the BBC.
And I think there have been lots of attempts to kind of turn wine knowledge into a video format, and most of them have been unsuccessful. Like you think of the difference between that and like cooking, like the proliferation of cooking shows, and yet like you can count the successful kind of wine, TV, video, movie kinds of things on like one hand. But I think you're right that offers the opportunity to really connect with people in a way that maybe a written article or a reference book can't.
Well, so my sister is 11 years younger than me. And she looked at me a couple years ago when I had already started writing, and I was very excited every time an article that I wrote would come out. And I still am, but to me, she was like, Sam, people don't read anymore. And it just...
It's good family members that keep you grounded.
It killed me. Because she is right in a sense. People read headlines. I'll put out things, and then I'll have people text me, and it's clear that they just read the headline. And so delivering it in a format, and I don't think that this is unnatural. I actually think that writing was because we didn't have a way to communicate with people, I don't know, hundreds of miles away, yeah, through video format. This is really natural. Like watching someone speak to you, it doesn't feel natural when you're recording alone. Oh, that feels icky. But it feels really natural to watch a video where someone's talking to you, because that's how we communicate. So I understand how we got here. And I also think that it's really important in that people know who you are and what you have, an identity, because this is how you connect. And if you want to be unromantic, this is how you sell wine. This is how you connect with people and get them to read your work. This is how everything is done. I was thinking the other day about the Kylie Minogue Rosé and how many people bought that wine. And it's because they feel a connection to her. It's not because the wine is particularly good, though it's not bad. It's decent. It's because they were like, oh, I have a connection to her. And the way we used to sell wine was my family, knew your family. We'd go over, we'd pick up a couple cases, but so few people buy wine like that anymore. So you have to give them something to identify with. And Tablas Creek has done an incredible job with that.
I mean, we realized early on, well, there's two pieces. One, we realized when we were at the very early stages of what we did that like we were making blends that didn't have a category in the marketplace from grapes that people didn't know and couldn't pronounce, from a place that they'd never heard of with French names that didn't mean anything to them. So like if we couldn't get past that and get people sort of inside our own worlds, like it was an impossibly uphill battle. But then we had to sort of reconsider how we were doing that, obviously, during COVID, when all of the normal ways when we were going out and telling our stories, wine festivals, wine dinners, people coming to see us at a tasting room, like all of those things just shut down. And we were like, well, how do we continue to share who we are and what we do? And like we realized that there were tools like this. Like I had used Instagram like in a very minor way. I'd never done an Instagram live before COVID happened. We sort of shifted a lot of the stuff that we were doing to video because we're like, oh, right, we need some way that they can actually see us and connect with us and like see our faces and hear us talking. And I felt like we learned more about how to tell our story in like that first year of COVID than we had learned in a decade before that. And
I think, yeah.
It was all sort of driven home as we realized, like, what's the single largest search engine on the planet right now? It's not Google, it's YouTube. More people search for what they're looking for on YouTube than do on Google now. So like if you can't figure out how to have a presence in that format that people are expecting, it's hard.
It's really hard. And I think people overlook it. They're like, oh, well, when you're selling a product, but they overlook what the connection will do. Even if you're a grower, I've been talking to growers because I have a 2023 vintage report due out in the mid this month, maybe towards the end of this month, on California. And I've been talking to growers who sell their grapes to brands which it's never going to be a single vineyard. They're just tonnage for these large brands. And right now we have an oversupply of grapes on the West Coast, but it's not just the West Coast. It's Australia, it's Spain, and trucks being upended on the Spanish-French border. But you have this glut, and so people are sticking really closely to their contracts. They're not buying any extra fruit. But the people who are drinking these wines, they don't know. They have no connection to the fruit source. So it's not as if they know that the contracts were cut or anything there. So I think if you are selling a product and you have a direct link to your consumer, it is a lot safer. And if you're a grower and you have quite a presence with the brand that you're selling to, you're less likely to get cut than other lesser known brands that don't interface as much or aren't as well known.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. So I have like 8 more questions I want to ask you, but we're also already at half an hour. So I'm just gonna ask 2. So one of them is that it seems like, and I think this ties into something you said earlier, it seems like a lot of the pieces that you write that I find super fascinating are ones where you clearly had to do a lot of research to figure out what was really happening there. Like I'm thinking of like that alternative packaging piece that you did that I shared it basically on every platform that I'm on because I was like, this is the best piece that I have ever read, diving into all of the complexities of all of these different options. Like, do you search out, are the kinds of things that interest you to write about the kinds of things that you need to research to understand?
Oh, it's such a complicated question now because at this point I'm just writing for jancisrobinson.com, and I love those really, really heavy research-based pieces. Those feed the industry more than they feed consumers.
Right.
And
that was for Guildsom, right? That piece.
That piece was for Guildsom, and then I did one on reusable bottles for 750 Daily. But I love those research-based pieces. They take so long. And the return on investment isn't monetary. It's definitely knowledge. And for me, being in the MW program, like that's, oh man, that's my bread and butter. That's what I love to get into. I passed theory this year, so now I have to focus on practical, which is I prefer that much less than I like looking into theory knowledge. But yeah, to answer your question, absolutely, the heavy deep dive into research is my preference. That gets less appealing to consumers in long form, I think, and is more appealing if you can give it in video format.
Makes sense. Okay, and then again, last real question. So the obviously the kind of intersection of wine and sustainability is one of the areas that I know seems like you're really interested in. Are there other lenses that you like to look at wine through?
I'm like, give me an example.
Ooh, I don't know. Like, I mean, you talked about wine and its connection to history and connection to place. And I mean, it's one of the things I think that makes it so endlessly interesting for those of us. I mean, the sustainability pieces, like, I can't remember which writer said this a couple of years ago, that basically that every wine story at this point is a climate change story. Um, but like there are lots of other ways to look at wine beyond just the sustainability of the operation. There's the historical piece. There's the geological piece. Um, there's the family personal historical piece, and I didn't know if any of those were things that you particularly enjoyed exploring, or
I've got a couple that I very much like to worm my way into certain stories, which is one of them is it is the sustainability aspect, but in through the lens of agriculture. So LEED certification is great, and I love water catchment, but this part of it is less interesting to me because the agricultural piece of sustainability and like what's under our feet and the microbial growth under our feet and if it affects the nutrient content of our food and how plant diversity affects what your fungal pressure is or whatever that I find that really, really interesting. The other thing that I find incredibly interesting is the trees that link everyone. So you go work a harvest somewhere and then you stay on for another vintage and you learn more about winemaking and then you go off and you start a winery. But there are some wineries that I've just found are hubs for people who've rolled out and started incredibly successful brands. And that's always interesting to me too, because you're like, what is it about this place that spawned so many awesome projects? Or what is it about this person who started so many people's careers? That's very interesting.
here in Paso, that guy is Ken Volk. He's basically the seed from which so much of that tree, I mean, including Neil, who's our winemaker here, that was where he got his start in wine. But if you trace people's stories back, most of them go back to Ken.
And that's an incredible, like, I don't hear that name very often. So when you find that person, it's not always the person who's the headliner. It's usually this person who's like hidden behind everyone else's success. I love finding that person. It's a joy to go on that treasure hunt.
Awesome. Like I said, I could do this all afternoon and it would be a pleasure. But I want to be conscious of your time and that we're at 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So if people want to read more of your work, learn more about you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Okay, so follow me on Instagram. I post a lot of my work there. Follow jancisrobinson.com on Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, X.
I can't do it. Sorry.
And then jancisrobinson.com is where all of my written work will be. Hopefully we'll have a YouTube channel up. I'm like, knock on wood that I can get that started pretty soon. But you can also email me at sam@jancisrobinson.com. I'm there for questions. I love questions because sometimes I don't know the answer and then I get to go down a rabbit hole.
Amazing. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Shout out. I think you're doing such cool stuff with your Instagram feed. I mean, I love that you're sharing like the Master of Wine, like your pursuit of the Master of Wine in a really cool way. One of the questions I had was the thing that you mentioned about the little like 5-minute wine news videos. I think those are super cool. I can't wait to see how those develop. So yeah, awesome. Shout out to you for doing all that cool stuff.
At some point I'll get a better microphone, but
hey, we all. Awesome. Well, Sam, thank you so much for taking a chunk out of your Friday afternoon to join and talk, and I can't wait to see what you're doing next.
Jason, thanks so much.
Awesome.
All right.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining. We will be totally done with harvest by the next time that I join you in a little under 2 weeks. And I'm going to have Melissa Saunders, Master of Wine, who's focusing on particularly like bag-in-box and other sorts of kind of alternative packaging. She's going to be my guest from New York in 2 weeks. Awesome. Bye, everybody. Thanks again, Sam.
Thanks. Bye.